So welcome everyone to our first launch meet, our first Thursday. So this is a new thing that we're starting to do, and this is the first month. So thank you all for being here and welcome. So this is something we've been asked for a long time. How can I continue to study with you, or do you have a Sangha? And since people who study with us are really not only all over the US, but all over the world, we thought that really the best way to offer this was on Zoom. And after giving some thought to the best timing, we thought this would be the best. It's not as good for Europe, but it's good for most of the time zones in the US. And so we'll be doing this every month except July on the first Thursday of the month for this year. And this will be taught by the entire team, who I will introduce in a few minutes. But it's a great way for all of you to get to know the other members of the teaching team, and for them to be able to get out there and give some talks and start reaching out to people. And also there'll be different formats. So there'll be some that are more the traditional meditation and Dharma talk format that we're doing tonight. And then there'll be other times where it's more of a group conversation, or there's a reading. So we're going to experiment with some different formats and really welcome your feedback. If you have anything you want to say about things you'd like to see, or formats or any of that, please email me directly, or Mimi, or Jeannie, and or you can use the contact form on the web page, and we will see it there. So this is kind of an evolving event that we're it's co-creating really with the community. And we really want it to be a Sangha gathering, where this is a chance for folks to be able to be with other people who like what we're doing and who want to practice in this style and with this understanding of spiritual practice in Buddhism, and how it can be done in a really thoughtful and kind of more systematic way. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about tonight, is how can we understand the Buddhist practices, both according to neuroscience and according to the structure that we're using for the teaching within Luminous Mind Sangha. So I'll introduce our teaching team now, and our team for these events. And the first person is Mimi Maduro. So Mimi, you want to wave a little bit, or yeah. And so Mimi is now an assistant teacher with Luminous Mind Sangha. She's still learning new things, but she's been helping me for a while now with retreats, with doing one-on-ones with people, with Jumpstart, with helping people on solo retreats. And she's just doing amazingly well, and I just love teaching with her and working with her. And so Mimi is off and running with all of that. Yeah. And Mimi will be giving talks in April and May. Is that right? Yeah, April and May. So you'll get to experience Mimi firsthand in April and May, and those topics are listed on the website. And then we have Henry Garcia. So if you want to wave, Henry. So that's Henry. And I know some of you all have been on retreats with each other, so it's kind of fun that some of you already know each other. Henry is a teacher in training, and he's going to be focusing on, at least at first, on the Brahmaviharas and the Samatha. And so he'll be the new Brahmaviharas retreat that we just added to the calendar at Cloud Mountain. He'll be able to come and sit in and see what it's like behind the scenes a little bit at that retreat. But he's been to pretty much all of the retreats almost that I offer, and he will be learning over time. So thank you, Henry. And we have Marisa Moorer. So there's Marisa, and she's an affiliated professional with Luminous Mind Sangha, and she is a licensed trauma therapist and a very, very deep practitioner. So, and she's part of our family, part of our team, and has been a student of mine for a while. And she's going to be speaking in June about practice and trauma therapy and trauma and how to work with that. And it's become such an important thing. And, you know, we feel really lucky to have her on the team, because then if any of us as teachers have questions, we've got an expert who we can go to for help. But I'll be actually interviewing Marisa and getting to ask her all the questions as a teacher that I've always wanted to ask trauma therapists about, you know, about practice and trauma and trauma therapy. So she'll be with us in June. And then another member is Per Jobs, and he's in Sweden, of which it is the middle of the night now, which is why he's not here. So he'll be watching the recording. And he's also a teacher in training who's kind of holding down the fort in Europe. And then we have Jeannie Bard. There's Jeannie raising her hand, and she is our wonderful Zoom host. So she's volunteered to help us by being the Zoom host here. So if you have anything you need or questions about tech or any of that, if you're having problems, please, you can chat directly to her, and she'll try and help you out. So thank you so much, Jeannie, for doing this, and she'll be helping us with other Zoom events as well. So we thought now it might be nice just to see where you all are from. So if you could type into the chat where you're hailing from, just to get a sense of that, that might be kind of fun to see. Oh, that's fun. Great. Well, welcome to all of you, wherever you're hailing from. And it was fun to see that. Okay, so we'll take the chat down now just to kind of keep our focus on the rest of what we're doing. So the format I've talked about, it'll vary tonight. We're gonna have a sitting, and then I'll give a talk on the 4 categories of practice in neuroscience and how these relate to awakening and embodiment. And I have some fun graphics that I've never used before that you'll get to see, and I can see how those work out. But this is kind of, you know, it's a good way of laying the groundwork really for everything that we're doing, because everything that we're offering really relates back to these ways of understanding how we practice. And it's a good way to really sort of orient your own practice so that when you're spending time doing things, you can sort of see where it fits into the grand scheme of your practice. So that's what I'll be talking about. And these will be recorded both for YouTube. We now have a YouTube channel called Luminous Mind Sangha, and all of our talks, as well as I've already got a bunch of talks and interviews and other things on there. All that will be available on YouTube, and also we'll have the audios on Dharma Seed. Once all these are edited, they'll be posted, so you can find it there. And just a reminder, if you aren't on our newsletter, if you know anybody who would like to sign up for it, that our newsletter comes out like roughly about 6 times a year, and all of our events and everything else that we do are in the newsletter and also on the website, luminousmindsangha.com. So let's go ahead and do a meditation. It'll be like roughly 30 minutes. And I'll do a little bit of light guiding at the beginning, and then we will go into silence. So go ahead and find a posture that's comfortable for you. And a good guideline is to feel relaxed and upright. So we want to feel a certain kind of alertness. We don't have to have it be, tight or rigid, but just, a way that the body is going to help us stay alert in the meditation. Then we also want to be relaxed and comfortable at the same time. And I'm going to start tonight with the bodhicitta practice, which is one of the heart practices. It's a practice from Tibetan Buddhism. And it's the aspiration for awakening for the benefit of all being. And so it's in Tibetan Buddhism, they often will do this practice at the beginning of every sitting for 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And in doing this, we feel into our heart and feel that sense of your own motivation for practice, what brings you to practice. If it is a motivation for awakening for yourself, it's fine to want that for ourselves. There's a wholesomeness in that. And then in the bodhicitta, we also feel that we're doing this not just only for ourselves, but for all being. And what good fortune we have to be able to practice. Really tuning into the fact that there are so many beings on the planet right now who are just suffering horribly from wars, from oppression, from starvation, from being unhoused, from illness, from so many of the pains of the human condition. And that when we practice, it makes a difference. It's contributing to the collective consciousness when we thin out our own patterns. So it's important when we practice. So really feeling in your heart that sincerity, your wish to benefit other beings with your practice. Sometimes we can feel a kind of longing for our deeper nature. And that's good. That longing is our own nature calling us home. We feel a sense of commitment to staying the course, no matter how long it takes. And then going on to the samatha practice. And you're welcome to stay with the bodhicitta as long as you want. But if you'd like to go on to the samatha practice, this is the focused attention category of meditation. Knowing the breath is in this area between the upper lip and the nostril called the anapana spot or region. Just knowing the breath as it's crossing that area. And if we get distracted, which is bound to happen, bring our awareness back to the breath without judging ourselves, bringing kindness, being glad that we notice, and doing that as often as necessary. And I'll be silent now until the end. So we'll stop there and have about 5 minutes or so for a stretch and bio break, caffeine break, and I'll see you then and we'll start the talk. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started, and I always invite people to turn on their cameras. It's not required by any means, but it helps, does help create that sense of Sangha. So I encourage you to do that if you feel like it. And just really wanted to start by saying how much joy I was feeling doing that sitting with you all. I mean, this has been 17 years in the making, this tonight. And I've always sort of resisted doing a monthly group because I'm actually gone a lot. And I could never really commit to it. And now that we have a whole team, we can actually be here every month on a designated night. And even when I'm off teaching, there are others who will keep that torch going. So, and it's just such a delight to see all of you here, to see your faces and feel like, I was really feeling like you're all in my living room. It's like something like that. So just, I feel a lot of joy and delight at seeing all of you here. So tonight is kind of a groundwork laying thing. And as I said, these will all be on YouTube and on Dharma Seed. But I really wanted to talk about a way of seeing practice. And this is really the framework that we're using for our teaching that's evolved over the 17 years that I've been teaching. And, we're hoping at some point maybe to have a book on each of these practices. That'll be ways off in the future, but we're at least making some tentative steps at that being a realistic possibility. And so I'll go through the 4 categories of practice using my hand-drawn graphic to demonstrate that. And really each of these 6 things all together are a great way of sort of orienting your practice and understanding what you're doing in order to really to deepen your spiritual unfoldment. So I'm going to start with this screen share of a graphic. I just want to say before I do this that I started out as an art major in college. And if my parents saw this, they would really think they wasted their money. So anyway, so this is oh, shoot, that's not the right one. Let me go back. Okay, so this is kind of where we all start, and that's supposed to be a mountain. So you can't really tell that I did have art training with that, but this is kind of bare bones just to get the concept across. So when we come to spiritual practice, it may not feel like a mountain necessarily, although most people when they first start meditating, it does kind of feel like a mountain and you're at the bottom and trying to get your way out. But in spiritual practice, it's often thought of as we're sort of we're working our way up to some more refined level of consciousness that where the air is thinner and there's more space and we're closer to something that is beyond the physical. So this is kind of where we start with seeing the mountain, not knowing what to do with it. And then the next step, a lot of times people will start practice, but they don't necessarily know anything about awakening. A lot of times we come to practice really just to feel better in our lives, to feel like we're suffering less and maybe to reduce stress, things like that. But at some point, if we practice enough, we start seeing there's more to meditation and spiritual practice than just stress reduction or being better people or maybe doing less damage in the world. There's actually a potential to know what we are. And this is really where we start seeing what's the potential of what might be at the top of the mountain, even if we aren't there. It's like we're orienting to something that is inspiring. And this is part of bodhicitta. You know, the bodhicitta practice is really about feeling that sense of there being something that is a potential, is a human potential that we're kind of, you know, orienting towards, even if we may not feel this is something we can achieve in this lifetime, which we have no idea. No one knows what their spiritual unfoldment is going to be like, but there is a sense that there's a potential. There's a greater potential for the human experience. And this is really what the Buddha was pointing at all the time, was our deeper nature that is always here. And yet we aren't in touch with that. There are things that get in the way of that. And part of meditation is, you've all heard me talk about it, we've got transformation and transcendence. So we're either working with the personality material that's obscuring our deeper nature, where there really isn't any suffering. There may still be the pain of the human condition, but there isn't that second arrow. The first arrow is just part of life, that there's pain. This is the first noble truth, but that second arrow of suffering is optional. And we start seeing that, you know, through the transformation of the personality material, we can reduce the amount of added suffering that we're creating that isn't necessary on top of the pain that's inherent in life. And then we may actually start having some transcendent experiences where we're having contact with our deeper nature in a way that we see the potential of awakening. Like, yeah, you know, even if you only had a 1 second experience of your deeper nature, that's enough to give a taste that there's something more out there. So this is all of, you know, the teaching we have about what is awakening, and the boundless dimensions and other things really help orient people to understanding the bigger picture. And to me, it's really sad that a lot of times people have been meditating for years and they've never even thought about awakening. And that is what the Buddha was pointing to always. It wasn't just about stress reduction. Those are all good side benefits, but the ultimate freedom is really in knowing our deeper nature, knowing what we are beyond the conditioned personality, the body. What am I beyond that? Is there something I can know? And yes, we can know that. So this is really what, when we start understanding what awakening is, it can become quite inspiring. And we can see that, yes, I've had tastes of this. This is a potential for me. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but it's a journey. That journey up the mountain is one that's really worth undertaking. And even getting there is worth undertaking, because it's an awesome hike up to the top, you know, rather than just relegating ourselves to live our lives at the bottom for, you know, forever. So then there are the 4 categories, and I'll just go back and just say what they are. So these are categories that I really love that in Buddhism, you know, the Buddha knew that there were different kinds of practice that were doing different things for our consciousness. And now through the neuroscience of having, like I did, electrodes on your head and other things, we can actually measure what's going on in consciousness. And it just happens that the main 4 categories that are being studied correspond with the 4 categories of Buddhist practice that we also teach all 4 of those here at Luminous Mind Sangha. So the first is heart practices. The second is focused attention, or, concentration practices, bring the mind stream together. The third is open monitoring, like Vipassana. And the 4th is self-transcending practices, like the main one that I teach is Dzogchen. So then we start with these basically different paths up to the top of the mountain. So samatha, I'll start there instead of starting with the heart practices, because samatha is kind of, it's where the Buddha started people. And when people came to him, this is really what he said to start with. You look at the suttas, it's everywhere. I mean, it's 60 to 80% of the suttas. This is when people ask him how to practice, this is what he told them to do. So the samatha path, I picked orange for that because there can be a lot of pretty joyful, blissful things that happen in the samatha practice, but it's also, you can see it's on the steep side of the mountain. So it's a hard practice. It's hard because it really will show us our compulsive thought patterns. It shows us the building blocks of the ego self really quickly and in very, very stark relief. So it can be a pretty direct path, but it's a steep path. But there's a lot of joy and bliss and freedom that's possible doing the samatha practice. And I'll talk about each practice a little more in a few minutes. So then the next, open monitoring, that's where the Buddha had people go next, was to Vipassana. And there's also, in other traditions, there's open monitoring practices. Really, in all traditions, there's concentration type practices. Open monitoring is in most traditions. So Vipassana is, we can meander a little more because basically everything is included. With open monitoring, we're ultimately allowing everything that arises in consciousness to be attended to, and there's a way we're really including all of life in that. And so I picked red for that because it's like, there's kind of the robustness of life in that everything that we could potentially be aware of ultimately can be included in Vipassana for our investigation. We're really investigating what's going on in our consciousness and then ultimately what's going on in the physical world and trying to understand that at a deeper level. Then the next category is heart-based. So you can see heart-based practices. I picked green for that because often green is associated with compassion and with the heart. And they kind of wander all over the place. They cross over the samatha, they cross over the vipassana. And when we're in touch with the heart, it gets a little floppy sometimes. So the heart practices are really, as the years go on, I keep seeing more and more how important they are, because when we can't be in the present moment, it's usually because there's something really hard going on in the heart. It's not because our thoughts are hard too, but usually it's the pain in the heart that takes us out of the present moment the most and is the hardest to actually feel and deal with. So those heart practices really they've been, I think, given short shrift in Buddhism, and this is why I really wanted to start teaching them more. So I was really thrilled when Cloud Mountain offered me an extra week where I could give it justice. And so I just added that retreat like a week ago. So the heart practices really give us a way of orienting to life and being able to be with really whatever rises in life without having to shut down or turn away or to purify the things that make us do that. And then the fourth category is the self-transcending practices. And what we teach is the Dzogchen. There's also other ones that I'll talk about. Dzogchen includes the other three categories. So it really sweeps through, and it is the most, it's the most direct path. If we have access to the self-transcendence where the me can go dormant, that is the fastest way to the top, but it's also the hardest. And this is why it's the pinnacle practice in Tibetan Buddhism. And usually you really kind of need all three other categories to be pretty solid before it's an option to practice that. And then the last part is embodiment. And this has gotten virtually no time in the teachings. And because Buddhism, like almost every historical tradition out there, was mainly based in monasticism, so they didn't really care so much about embodiment. You just get off the wheel, get to the transcendent, And they also didn't have the understanding of psychology to really know how to live a householder life without being constantly triggered by the instinctual drives and going off and doing unskillful things or even killing people. We go from unskillful all the way to lethal, which we can still see today, that people, like I have one teacher who says that basically we're the instinctual drives with a thin veneer of civility over the top. That's what humans are. We're basically, apes without hair. And it doesn't take a lot to trigger some humans to the point where they'll kill, So, I mean, we are being spiritual practitioners, that's unlikely for us, but where do we still carry those tendencies? And how do we really live a life where we own possessions? The monastics would take away all the instinctual drives as best they could by having you not own anything. You all look the same. So you basically all look like the Buddha, whether you're a man or a woman. You shave your head, you wear the robes, you have a bowl. That's it. So they took away ownership. They took away sexuality. They took away your social network. The monastics are now your family. You don't go out past the wall unless you have to. And that was how embodiment was dealt with. And now that we have psychology, we have some more options. So we really emphasize embodiment a lot and doing the off the cushion work. And the good news is when you're doing the embodiment work, it actually accelerates your on the cushion practice because you're thinning out those patterns and you have the extra 15 hours a day to do your practice versus just the time you're meditating. So this is just a graphic to kind of give you another way of sort of holding the different practices and how it all relates to each other in a way that is cohesive. So I'm going to stop the screen share there and okay, so what do you all think of that? I'm not going to, take questions now, but did you like it? What did you think of my artwork? Yeah, so we'll have time for questions and comments later, but this just came to me, and I don't know, for me, it was helpful to sort of think of it in this graphic way that where it's a journey, and these things do overlap, and there are, we're going up, and then maybe we're going down for a while, and then we're looping over, and then we need to do heart practices for a while instead of samatha, and then we're doing that, and then we need to do vipassana because that'll help really digest the material that we're encountering. And so we're, knowing why we're doing practices and what they're doing and how to skillfully, decide what practice you're going to do when and for what purpose. That's a big part of, to me, making the most use of your time. Because the time we spend practicing and also going on retreats is really precious, and we don't want to be squandering that and wasting it. We want to make good use of it. So then I'll go then through each of the categories of practice a little bit and talk about, what are they and what are they doing? And also how do the other practices relate as antidotes? Because if we really understand how to use the practices together, I mean, the Buddha gave us all these different practices for a reason. He didn't just give us one practice. He gave us all of these, and they actually work together more powerfully as a set than they do individually. Just like the Brahma Viharas, if one is like when I teach the Brahma Viharas, I teach all four of them together because that's how they were really meant to be taught. I mean, you can pull metta out. It was taught by the Buddha as what's called a protective practice. So he did teach it by itself, but really the Brahma Viharas, when we're doing the heart practices, they're so much more powerful when we learn them and understand them together. And each of the categories is the same way. If we know how they relate to each other and how they can be used to as antidotes for each practice. It just strengthens everything. So the heart practices, then, the ones that that we teach and that are most widely used in Buddhism and that are available more to everybody, are bodhicitta, the Tibetan practice that I did at the sitting, which is the aspiration for awakening for the benefit of all being. So in this practice, all of them are heart oriented. So we would normally feel these things in the heart if they are arising. I mean, these are practices. So at first we may not feel anything. We're doing them because the heart is veiled in these ways, and that's fine. But this is part of what we're practicing. A lot of times when people are doing bodhicitta, they don't feel that flame for awakening. It's another way of understanding it, is it's like a flame. It's a longing for our deeper nature. And it brings a lot of people to the path. And sometimes if people don't have that at the beginning, if they get a taste of their deeper nature, even if it's just a second of really, that profound experience that might even be off the cushion. It could be, seeing a sunset or something in nature, or being at the birth of a child, or when somebody dies, or some profound moment, maybe having a car accident, where we can feel that there's something more that we are. That can be that can start to unlock this flame for awakening. And that flame can be fanned. And that's really what I'm trying to do, especially in the What is Awakening program, but not all of the teaching. We're really trying to help people tap into that, and to know that your practice isn't just like sitting there waiting for the bell to ring, like toughing it out. You're practicing for all being. It's meaningful. It's doing something. It's doing something real. Even though we don't get, other people aren't going to like come and pat us in the back and say, gee, thanks for meditating for all beings today. If we really know that ourselves, it's still meaningful. And then we have the 4 Brahma Viharas, metta, mudita, karuna, and upekkha, which are loving kindness, empathetic joy, compassion, and equanimity. And those are in both the Theravadan and the Tibetan tradition. And all of these are purification of heart. So that's what it's doing to our consciousness. Is the Brahma Viharas really, as we're taking, having different people be the object, and in these we're focusing on some aspect of a person or a situation. So for example, in loving kindness, the object is the person's goodness. So in each of them, we're focusing on a person, either ourselves or someone else, and something about them that normally, if our heart was open, this would arise naturally. So that's really what we're trying to do, is see if we can cultivate that arising naturally all the time, or if it's not arising naturally, then we can work with what's in the way of that. So for example, in our normal everyday life, we're just walking around, we're at the grocery store. Well, if we're in touch with other people's goodness, it's like, wow, I hope they're having a good day. That is what happens when the heart is unhindered. So these are really practices that help to reduce the hindrances in the heart. And then in the focused attention category, we have the samatha, and Theravadan, or in Tibetan Buddhism, shamatha with support. So here we usually would use the breath. In the Tibetan version, there's a lot of other objects, but they often use the breath. And we're purifying the mind stream here, actually purifying the consciousness by confronting those grooves in our consciousness that are compulsive, by just trying to stay with an object, and then we get to see what's pulling us off. And it's glaringly obvious what's pulling us off. And so in these practices, we're really challenging those grooves in our consciousness and reducing the compulsiveness and replacing that. It's like a software upgrade. We're reprogramming our consciousness with something neutral to positive, and relying less and less on those ego patterns as what we are, so that that isn't what's defining us. We start having more of a sense that there's something deeper that is more our true nature, more true than the ego self. Because we start seeing, okay, there's something that's observing the patterns. What is it that's observing the patterns? There must be something I am that isn't the pattern if there's something that's observing the pattern. So we really start seeing that with the samatha and getting some freedom from it. And then in the open monitoring, Vipassana, and then in Tibetan, shamatha without support. So this is where we're opening up our awareness to pretty much everything. There's a way of doing that that's a lot more methodical, which the way I like to teach it is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And I have free talks on Dharma Seat on Vipassana and so on, if you're interested in that. But we're ultimately, starting small, like with the body, and then including emotions, thoughts, our personality patterns, to where we are cultivating the ability to be with what's arising and passing without getting caught up in it. So that both on the cushion and off the cushion is really powerful. When, say, we get triggered, we don't have to just be completely identified with that. There's a gap to where we can go, I'm triggered. Okay, what self-images are getting challenged here? What beliefs do I have that are causing me to get triggered? What patterns? And we can start thinning those out by actually going right through the middle of them and opening them up and digesting them so that they actually can stop arising. So that we're not having to push it down into the unconscious where it's just going to leak out, but we actually start digesting the patterns permanently. Then in self-transcending practices, I like the Dzogchen practice because it uses the other 3, and it also you can cultivate non-duality. So this is really what teachings and just about every tradition are pointing to, is the possibility of the ego self going dormant and really knowing what we are as our deeper nature. And even if that's only just a second, that second is profound. And those seconds can be cultivated to be more and more, we have more and more seconds in a row. And with Dzogchen, because it's an open eye practice, we can even take that off the cushion into the embodiment, into living and functioning from there potentially. There's also the Chittanupassana practice in Theravadan Buddhism, which is about the closest we have, but it's not as well defined how to cultivate it. So I don't think it's quite as rigorous of a practice, but it's a great practice. And people who do Chittanupassana also cultivate the non-duality potentially. And in here, the Vipassana is a purification of our view of our own consciousness and of reality by investigating. So we're doing a lot of investigating in Vipassana. In Dzogchen and the Rigpa, we're really purifying our identity. So this isn't in Buddhism, this is a term I made up. The other 3, purification of the heart, the mind, and the view, are all part of Buddhism. But in the self-transcending category, we're really purifying our identity of what am I? Am I this body? Am I this ego self and the self-concept I have of what I am, or am I something deeper? And this is where I will often use this, my hand metaphor of like, this is our normal view of reality, where we see everything as separate, and I'm here and you're here and your computer's here. And from this perspective, it's accurate. But if we take this away, this is really the deeper reality, that there's a deeper nature that goes beyond the individual body and individual consciousness. And like if I feel my finger right now, I can feel this finger all the way down into the hand. And that is like our deeper nature. But where does the finger end and the hand start? From down here, there is no separation between these things. So when we know what we are down here, we are knowing our deeper nature. We're knowing ourselves as the grounded being that's manifesting every single thing in form. And fortunately, our consciousness isn't limited by the body. Our consciousness can know this boundlessness. So that's what we're knowing in the self-transcending practices. And that's why I call it purification of identity, because when we know that right now, as you're sitting here, that nature, that deeper nature is doing you right this second. It's never not been there, ever. So this is what we are knowing in the self-transcending practices. And all the practices, like my drawing, they can all lead to the top. We don't have, it's not just the self-transcending that leads to the top, but it is the practice that is pointing right there. It's the one that is designed to help you cultivate those moments of non-duality where the me goes dormant. And then ultimately that can become more ongoing. And with concentration, it can be locked in. And it's gotten kind of funny because now that I'm teaching the 2-week retreat with the Dzogchen, it's like half the people there are now doing Dzogchen and half are doing Samatha. So it's getting a lot of Tibetan practitioners who are coming because they're actually getting time to meditate. And it's really joy for me because that's my main practice now. It includes all the other categories. So when you're doing Dzogchen, you're doing all 4 categories. And then in terms of antidotes, all of the other 3 practices become antidotes. So say you're doing, Samatha. Well, the first antidote for Samatha is Vipassana. So if you really find that you just can't stay with the breath, at some point you start investigating, what is this pattern that's taking me off? Let me turn towards that and understand it more. So this is where we can apply a little of Vipassana. And so I have a chart. I'll show you my last chart here just to give you a quick, let's see. Oops, that's not working. Okay, I'm going to turn that off. Let's see. Oh, it's still opening. Okay. Yeah, there it is. Okay. So, so I have made this chart up, and at some point I will put this on the website, but I'm starting to, I'm going to start using this chart where I actually have the 4 categories and what they are, what they're doing, what the main object of awareness is. Can you all see that? Okay. I don't know that it's the whole thing is showing, but I'm just kind of scrolling up and down. But this is just a way to sort of understand, and I'm going to fill this in more, what the categories are, what they're doing, what the object is for each of them, and then how they relate. So like I gave the example of the Samatha, Vipassana would be the first thing to use if you just can't stay with the breath. But then, maybe there's something painful you're encountering, so you want to go to the Brahma Viharas and really see, oh, I can't be with the breath because there's actually something in my heart that's really calling my attention that I actually need to pay some attention to. And you might use the Brahma Viharas for a while as a way of working with that. So, so again, this is just a graphic to kind of give you a sense of how they all work together. So I'll go ahead and stop there and see if there are any questions or comments about this or about anything. Robin. And yeah, there you go.
Just real simple. I really like that chart. I'm visual, so I look forward to that coming out. But I did catch a word or something that I had never heard of over in that third column called Rigpa.
Rigpa. Yes, I that's good. I could be more specific. So Rigpa is the fourth in Dzogchen practice. It's basically building blocks. So you start with the heart practice of bodhicitta, and then you go to samatha, and then you go to vipassana, and then I've added a step in there called non-doing. And then there's the potential to what is called realized Rigpa. So it's one has to be kind of ripe for that. So I teach this in the 2-week retreat. It's like I teach the first week is the bodhicitta and the samatha. And then for the people who are on the Dzogchen track, I'll do a light vipassana. The other people stay with samatha. So everybody gets to decide which they want to do. And then we do vipassana for a day. We do non-doing. And then there's the potential to realize this in our consciousness. So it's basically a meditation practice where when your consciousness is thinned enough and there's enough stability so that the phenomena that are rising, passing don't pull us into identification with them, we can maybe realize our deeper nature directly. So that's Rigpa is the Dzogchen practice that's added to the other three that gives us the potential to realize non-duality and to realize our deeper nature. Yeah. Good question. Thanks for asking. Let's see, how do I unpin you? Oh, there it is. Okay. Other questions or comments? Oh, Debbie.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi. Can you say a little more about how you define and what you mean by the embodiment, that you wrote at the bottom of the mountain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the
Thank you.
embodiment, it's not been really emphasized much in Buddhism because really the ideal was to become a monastic. It was more emphasized in Tibetan Buddhism, and that's why in the Dzogchen we actually have an open-eyed off-the-cushion practice, because they had a tradition of non-monastics that were fully enlightened, that were equal to the monastics. I mean, in Theravada Buddhism, we have all kinds of lay people that were enlightened, but they always were kind of not as good as the monastics. There was a little bit of hierarchy there. So they just didn't really know what to do. So they used renunciation as one of the main tools to deal with all of the ways we can get triggered when we own stuff, when we have a mortgage, when we have a partner and children and a job with a boss that maybe isn't always the best. What do we do in the face of all that? They was like just ordain, but of course they had all the same problems in the monastery. It wasn't like that really got rid of anything, but it simplified things. So embodiment is the off the cushion work, which, you've been in the mentoring program for a while now. So all that off the cushion work that you've done, looking at your patterns and thinning those out and saying, okay, well, I've got this thing going on in my life. What's going on there? What's triggering me about that? And how does that relate to my on the cushion? So this is a lot of what I've brought in actually from the Diamond approach, where they've got amazing technologies for embodiment, because it's a modern path and they really see the psychological and the spiritual as one continuum. So that's what we're doing, is we're seeing the psychological and the spiritual as one continuum, but really using meditation as the main practice to work those patterns that you're seeing on the cushion that are taking you off the object. You are seeing the building block of the ego self right there. You don't need to look around, you know exactly what those things are, you know. And when we see them in our life too, when we really start, instead of just saying, oh, thoughts are all empty, just go back to the breath. No, that's bypassing. So we're really encouraging people not to, you know, traditionally, unfortunately, in Theravada Buddhism especially, it was like, well, thoughts are just empty, just ignore it. It doesn't mean anything. Sorry, that psychologically, we know that doesn't actually work. It's not that it isn't true. It is actually true. But when we're identified with the ego self, we actually have to digest that material. It's not enough to just push it down. We have to, at some point, go right through the middle and digest it. And when you, like, say, for example, somebody is conflict avoidant, I'll use that one because almost everybody can relate to that in some way. And you see on the cushion, you're ruminating about a conversation or rehearsing what you're going to say to somebody, but then you never say anything to that person. What's going on there? Well, I need to have a difficult conversation, but I really just don't want to. So I'm just going to sit here and think about it when I'm on the cushion all the time. But it's your deeper nature saying, you know what? This isn't right. You need to work through this defense mechanism of being the pleaser. And so then when we're off the cushion, we actually take action to skillfully try and work with this. It breaks the pattern so that we're not so compulsively subjected to it on the cushion. So this is where the on and off the cushion, they just totally support each other. So that's, you know, just one example. We could take anger, we can take, you know, really any of the defilements and any of the patterns that we're seeing. I probably worked with just about all of them at this point. Fantasizing, you know, we've got really the defilements are a way of describing them, but it's a lot more useful, I think, to see what your own patterns are and then give names to that. Like I talk about the top 10 hits, to have like even just the top 2 or 3 or 4, and then start following those as a thread. And when we're doing the off the cushion work, the whole thing just gets digested a lot faster, and also our life improves and we're more authentic. Does that answer the question? Yeah, so it's really the off the cushion work. And at some point on Intercraft, I will have a whole workshop on embodiment. I'm actually going to start teaching. I've been teaching, like I have some Dharma talks on Dharma Seed on embodiment, but I'm going to start teaching this more because I actually have a whole body of teaching around it now that has gotten kind of developed over these years. And it's really effective. I mean, I see this in the mentoring program, people's lives change. And even not in the mentoring program, just doing 1 week or 2 week retreats, people change. So, and they're freer. And it's really amazing to witness that. Any other questions or comments? Joe Beth and then Robin, if we have time. Hi, Joe Beth.
Hi, this is wonderful. My comment is that there was just so much that you talked about, and I could see how the threads all fit together, but right now it's like kind of overwhelming, and I want to grasp it better, and so I hope that's in my future.
Yeah, it is. I'm trying to, I thought that to start to kind of give the overview of the map. So basically, like, you got a map of the world, and, 15 minutes or however long I had. And there's a lot of countries in there, and it can be really overwhelming to try and
No.
understand all the countries at one time. So, the best way really to do it is to just do one practice at a time, and to really get your sea legs around that but also knowing that the others are there. So like now when I'm teaching retreats or day longs or anything else, even if it's like on samatha, for example, or on vipassana, I always start by saying, this is how it fits in with the categories of practice. So you kind of always have, even though like you're exploring, France, you sort of know that Spain's over here and Germany's over here. And if you got to the border, you might want to pop over and see what the other country is like. And so it's kind of like that, but you can only really digest so much at one time. But then, when you've really like seen France, at some point you go, okay, now I'm ready for Spain. I feel like I don't need to spend more time in France anymore. So there would be a way to look at it where maybe it would feel a little bit less overwhelming. I don't know. How does that land with you? That makes sense?
It does. I mean, I've been doing these practices. I mean, meditation, samatha, you taught me, and in Tucson, and vipassana has been my main practice from the beginning, and no one ever tied it all together, and now I can just get a sense that you, like you say, there's a world map, and I might thoroughly know a couple of countries because I've spent a lot of time there, but the world is a huge place, so I want to visit these other countries that you had. Yeah,
right. So. Well, it's kind of interesting because I started that way too. I mean, I did Vipassana for a long, long time before I even knew there were other practices. And really the way, like when I was starting, which probably was the same when you were starting, you'd go to like a retreat or a day long or Dharma talk, and it was just like, this is meditation. There was no saying this is one of different kinds of meditation. But if you look at what the Buddha taught, he taught all this stuff, so it was sort of like one thing got pulled out because that was what the teachers who went over to Asia and brought it back, that was what they learned. So they brought back what they taught, which is totally understandable. But over the years, even in those places, they've introduced more of the others, but there's still, it's kind of a Vipassana centric world in the Western, and even in Asia. It kind of, and there's reasons for that I won't go into, but the other practices that the Buddha taught are getting reintroduced because there is a way that they are more powerful together. And there's a reason why he didn't just teach one practice. There's a reason that he taught these other things. And now we're seeing through the neuroscience too, that, like I've seen people who may be really good at, say, either samatha or vipassana, but if they haven't done the heart practices, they're going to get derailed every time when there's something that comes up that's hard in the heart. They will go out of the present moment. So, at some point we have to sort of really spend some time in each. And it sounds like for you, because you have been practicing a long time, it's in some ways more about making the connections.
Yes.
You have spent time in these different countries, but there hasn't been a systemic understanding. And that's really one of the things I bring is I'm a very systemic thinker. I worked for years in the business world doing large, 10-year complex systemic change initiatives, trying to change hundreds of thousands or millions of people's behavior. And so that's an offering that I feel like I want to make, is to make it more understandable so people really can know the whole lay of the land and round themselves out, because it's just more powerful when we have all of them. And also to do Dzogchen, you need all three categories. So I think the Dzogchen is the pinnacle practice of Tibetan Buddhism, and there's a reason, because it's the great perfection. And yeah, thanks for the question. And I didn't mean for it to be overwhelming, but this is where, if you eat the elephant one bite at a time, that's the way to do it, where it's a little bit more digestible. Yeah.
Okay, well, I hope to stick with it, and it's going to be exciting to see you in Tucson really soon. So
yeah. Well, the What is Awakening retreat and teaching is really the one that fleshes out more each of these and how it all fits together in the kind of the grand scheme of practice. So you'll have more time to go deeper on each of these then. Yeah. Okay, well, we're out of time, so that seems like a good place to stop. But it's really been a joy to have you all here for our first Thursday, and I look forward to seeing all of you either here or at events, and many blessings for your new year. May we all deepen in our understanding of reality and our knowing the unity of all of being.